Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
Welcome to Courageous Conversations. I'm Dr. Peter Weinstein, and I'd like to welcome my partner.
I'm Dr. Philip Nelson, and we'd like to wish all of you a happy Thanksgiving. We want to start with acknowledging that we wouldn't be on here if it wasn't for Nicole Nelson, who actually produces this for us. And we want to start out by saying how much we appreciate you, Nicole, and want to include you in our attempt to be cheerful and to acknowledge those things that we should be thankful for.
You know, and Phil, as we look to give thanks, not just to Nicole, but to all of our listeners, you know, those of you who have stood by us for the 5+ years that we've been doing this and have stood by the different changes in the environment politically, different changes in the environment from a temperature, rain, and snow standpoint. We just want to thank all of you for continuing to be a part of the Courageous Conversation. And I want to specifically say thank you to my wife, Sharon, and to my kids, Brooke and Brianna, for allowing me and encouraging me to have a voice and to engage in these courageous conversations, whether they are with you on a podcast or in other platforms where I may have a chance to share my thoughts on the world and or the veterinary profession or sports or whatever the case may be.
And I too want to share that in preparing for this podcast, Peter and I decided that this was the time to actually acknowledge those who have allowed us to make it this far. And I also must acknowledge my debt to my family. Obviously, it is clear to me that my success is largely based on both my faith in God and my wife, Doris, and the strength that she has shared with me and the ability to enter into these type of discussions, whether it's on the podcast or whether it's with my colleagues or even those who don't think like me, is largely because of the courage of my wife and my lovely family, Nicole, Brian, and Vincent, and my grandchildren. And so family is very important. But it is because of that importance that I understand that we all have ties like that with family, that we are trying to persevere. And all of the political shenanigans that we weave in and out of our lives is simply or should be the impetus to support the members of our family and the futures of our family. And since we're all one big family, the futures of our country.
And I want to thank Dr. Philip Nelson for picking up the phone about 5.5 years ago when, out of the blue, I gave him a call to talk about some social issues that were going on in the American society at that point in time and trying to figure out and understand where the world was from his perspective relative to my perspective relative to what was going on. Because without him picking up the phone, number one, I would have not been doing this podcast. Number two, I would have no understanding of some of the issues that I really didn't have back then from my background growing up in the Northeast in white privilege, to see life through a different set of eyes and a different way of doing things and seeing things, and to, over the last 5 years, shared topics and issues that we have agreed upon, we have disagreed upon, that we have learned from, and that we have addressed for all of you to try to think differently and to develop your own perspective. So if Dr. Nelson had not been gracious enough to pick up the phone, we wouldn't have courageous conversations, and we would not have become as fast friends as we have. So, Phil, thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for those kind words. I hope my mother doesn't follow technology very well, so she does. You know, you said all that, and she hadn't heard it, so I'm going to have to play it back for her one day when I see her again. But I also want to return the compliment and to say that I'm appreciative that you had the courage to call. It was a time of tension when George Floyd died that this whole country went through. And I actually believe that your phone call was much more impactful for me than any demonstration that I participated in during that time, simply because we got to exchange views that were either similar or not. And we did it in a civil way with the intent of getting to what we thought was the truth, or at least frame the truth from the different perspectives that we came from. That is, and from that phone call that you initiated.
So, give me a fond memory of Thanksgiving in the Nelson household when you were growing up in Jackson in the 60s.
Hmm.
I'd ask in the
Well,
50s, but you probably don't remember.
yeah, well, no, I was 5 years old. I was 6 years old by 1960. So no, I don't remember a lot about that. But Thanksgiving in our house was a time for blessings, time to um, it was they were traditional. It was a traditional Thanksgiving. We always watched the Thanksgiving parades on TV. It was a religious time for us. We always counted our blessings. We never thought we were poor. We never felt poor. And so, but it was a time for extravagance on our budgets. And our meals were the traditional meals, traditional Thanksgiving meals with turkey and then soul food at the same time. Turkey, dressing, gravy, collard greens, corn, things like that. I think that as a child, I probably appreciated not going to school more than anything else. And as I matured, the mantle, we tended to have a religious dinner on Thanksgiving. We were constantly reminded of the grace of God and the fact that things could have been worse. We didn't necessarily we weren't necessarily reminded of the fable of the Pilgrims and the Indians creating the first Thanksgiving. But then I've been a historian all my life, and so that always came up somehow, some way, um, uh, in remembering what started this practice. How about you?
Well, first of all, I didn't grow up poor, so I can't address that. And I didn't have soul food. And I'm trying to remember Thanksgiving at home. I always think we went to somebody else's house for Thanksgiving. I'm pretty certain, at least a large portion of growing up at Thanksgiving, we went to somebody else's house for Thanksgiving. My mom tended to have a bigger celebration around Hanukkah, which was our religious component in between that Thanksgiving and Christmas time, but it was classically turkey and all the fixins and everything else. No collards. Should have had collards, but quite as easy to get in the
You have no
Northeast.
idea what you were missing.
No, no collards. Did you have pig's feet and black-eyed peas too?
That's New Year's,
Okay.
not Thanksgiving.
But I remember football. You had the NFL games, whether it was in Dallas or Detroit, and then it was like classically Oklahoma, Nebraska played on Thanksgiving Day. And then there were some other classic games that were played. And I also remember that the kids ate in the basement. The adults
Mm,
ate upstairs and the kids ate in the basement.
mm.
So we didn't always eat. We were just probably playing more than anything else and watching some football. And I think as you grew up, your goal was to be treated respectfully and allowed to join the adults.
Well,
So
it's amazing. We had something similar. First of all, we didn't have basements in Mississippi because of the Yazoo clay. It made it difficult to build a basement that could withstand um, the rain and droughts that occurred. And eventually your walls would crack. And we also didn't have basements. I was in an economic strata that you didn't live in houses that could even build basements if we could have built it. But that was an architectural problem. But we also had a division of the children from the adults. But we were all on the same floor in the same, either in the same room or with tables that tied two rooms together. And there was the children's table. If we had a lot of people, usually it was just our family, unless we were traveling to Alabama to visit my relatives on my father's side. And there was an adult table and a children's table, and everybody couldn't wait to be invited to the adult table. What we didn't realize was that um, if you're at the adults table, then you actually participated in making the meal, or you did, or you set up the tables or whatever. As you got older, you gained more and more responsibility toward supporting the meal. As far as football was our pastime too. In Mississippi, the big battle was either in Mississippi and Alabama. The big battles are Ole Miss and Mississippi State, and Auburn and Alabama. And being between the two states, we watched it all, uh, and because we couldn't go to either of those schools, we weren't necessarily fans of either team, rabid fans of either team. We tended to, as the teams became integrated, we tended to pick the team based on which African American athlete we liked the best, on either team. That was the approach we took during the attack on segregation in the South. But it was fun. It was a time of mirth and joy. And again, we weren't in school, so that was a good thing for us.
Yeah, I forgot about the no school thing, but it's true. We got 4 days off. You kind of looked forward to it. You also knew that you're about 4 weeks off from having a couple of weeks off for the Christmas holidays from that standpoint. Yeah, we would probably now the weather in the Northeast at Christmas time was a lot less predictable, and it could be snowing, it could be raining, it could just be cold. But yeah, we'd probably go out in backyard and throw the football around, or go off to one of the parks and throw a football around and have some fun. And then, the adults did all the heavy lifting, and all we did was make a mess.
Yeah. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also add that although we couldn't watch it on TV, we spent either the Saturday after Thanksgiving or the Saturday before Thanksgiving. In our culture, at least in Mississippi, the HBCU clashes were penultimate challenges. And so for my family, it was Jackson State and Alcorn.
Really?
Yeah. Those football games were our clashes that reigned for the rest of the year. Whoever won that game was superior for the rest of the year, and whoever lost that game couldn't wait until next Thanksgiving to make up for the loss. So and there are seminal clashes throughout the HBCU conferences that many people are not aware of because they're historically Black institutions that received historically a lot less money for support and didn't make it to television because of that for a long time.
What's a classic game that Grambling against who's Grant?
Grambling and Southern.
Okay, yeah.
Southern University.
Yeah. Army Navy used to play it on Thanksgiving Day as well.
Yeah.
And it was always fun to figure out whether it was going to be snowing at some of the football games from that standpoint. But it is interesting the history of which Thanksgiving celebrates the collaborative effort or the hosting of the Americans or the British at that point in time with the Native Americans, and the concept of bringing people of different backgrounds together at the same table to try to support one another, because the British at that point in time during the late 1600s were dealing with tremendous amount of challenges in getting settled in the new world at that point, and whether it was weather, whether it was what to eat, whether it was other things. So whatever the story is, whatever the facts are from the first Thanksgiving, it really should have set a precedence for this country's future in terms of collaboration, cooperation, immigration, to bring people together to help create a stronger nation. Maybe we learned something, maybe we didn't, but the stories that we learned in our history books and that have been passed down from generation to generation seem to have changed. And I'm not really sure what the history is any longer and what the facts are. And I guess we'll never really know the facts of the first Thanksgiving because none of the people who were there are still around, are they?
Well, I think we know a few of the facts that haven't changed. Let's put things in perspective here. We're talking about a cast of people that crossed an ocean for the first time, that was not necessarily a done deal when you left the coast of Great Britain. And we're talking about a group of people that arrived on the eastern seashore of the United States, went through a year of toil and trouble and weather that they didn't understand, they couldn't prepare for. And they were actually starving in a new country about this time. And winter is setting in. And the native population decided that they could not allow them to starve. And essentially, it was their grace that started this great tradition by saving a people that ultimately ended up taking their land. That was the payment that we essentially gave them.
In many ways, the kindness of the Indian tribe that hosted the 50 pilgrims was a kindness that came back to bite them. And without that kindness, there's no telling what the current United States, what the British colonies eventually might have looked like, because survival through those first couple of years in the early 1600s probably sent a message back that this was a welcoming place, and eventually led to the migration and immigration of the British and others into what is now the United States. So it is the host people, the Native Americans, and specifically the Wampanoag tribe, were the ones who probably set the foundation for what eventually became the British colonies and then the United States. And without their kindness, you and I may not be having this conversation. The likelihood is that you may have stayed, your family may have not migrated here, my family may not have migrated here. Who knows what would have happened? It's like the alternate universe. What would what would the United States look like if the Native Americans hadn't been so welcoming to the Pilgrims?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that that event was that critical in the manifest destiny of the United States. It was one event, and that showed that can definitely illustrate the paradox of advancement, societal advancement. And definitely, if we had taken a different, I think it may have allowed for a different collaboration amongst different peoples. And that may have ultimately changed the picture of the country that we now see. But I think there was an there were inexorable pressures in the then civilized world that particularly those of dominance and but those struggles of dominance between the established countries, just as there were struggles of dominance between the native tribes in this country. It was human nature. And I think human nature would have resulted in that unstoppable advance of humans across this country. It is just unfortunate that the desire for land overcomes the desire for peace sometimes.
It is, by the way, they didn't serve turkey at the first Thanksgiving, Phil. I don't think you nor I were there, but they didn't have turkey then.
Yeah, well, I think they were lucky to have, to have fish and corn, and they appreciated that.
And I would suggest that a lot of that came with the assistance of others. I mean, we can go back through the history of persecution in England and religious freedom. I want to do a shout out to Ken Burns, the movie producer, director. There's a great American Revolution series that he's had on PBS last week. I believe it's 10 hours, I think. Really insightful look back at the progress, or the process, I should say, of America from British rule to freedom, and the story to a degree of the fact that George Washington had slaves, Thomas Jefferson had slaves, and the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, didn't define all men the same. In fact, it didn't define all women the same, and it didn't define Native Americans the same, and it didn't define Blacks the same. So we've been living in this world of instability and inaccuracy for many, many years, and really continue to do so in kind of the environment that we currently live in. But I don't want to get off the giving thanks path, because I do think, at least if you take the time to be grateful and share your feelings to those who are around you and with whom you have collaborated and cooperated and worked, we probably don't give thanks enough. We shouldn't just be giving thanks on one day, the fourth Thursday of the year, but we should be giving thanks more often and more routinely for those who have supported us throughout the times and whatever challenging times we may be facing. So although this is around Thanksgiving, I think it's important to say that it's probably a feel-good thing to not forget to give thanks for those around you and to be grateful for their support regularly.
What he said, I agree. Recently, we did a podcast on recognizing the emotional tenor of the nation in terms of the people that we run into. And despite the barbs on that we may send out when it comes to human behavior, I think I want to express my appreciation to the American people in general, without association with party of any kind, that basically we tend to adhere to a pattern of behavior that is one of peaceful resolutions to different opinions. And basically, on an individual basis, I have seen that Americans are more likely to be individually helpful and assistive to others that are in need of help. And I think that we should listen to our better angels a little more often in how and use those urges at times when we least feel them in order to guide our reactions. And I want to say that I'm thankful at least for those urges. I'm thankful for the connecting human trait. And I just think that we need to be reminded of that common stream of emotion that flows through all of us.
So, Phil, as you know, or may remember, we were in Aspen last week for a brief vacation, Aaron and I. Well, we looked at real estate just for fun and realized that it was outside of our price. And we looked at clothing and we looked at shops, and it's a slow time in Aspen. There really wasn't even any snow in the mountains of any consequence. One of the places we stopped, which was right next to the fire station, was a thrift shop in Aspen. And we were in there, and they had some really nice stuff that you'd like to buy at a regular store, but it was at a thrift shop, and there were people coming in and donating clothes. And we were standing there, and a gentleman, an older gentleman who looked like he was not as well off as many of the people in Aspen, had a voucher. And the voucher allowed for him to get various articles of clothing, jackets, pants, shoes, sweaters, etc. And all he had to do was present this voucher to the people at the thrift store, and everything was free. And it stood out because of the humanity of man to help out others in a community that is probably got some of the most expensive real estate in the country, still has people who live there that are not as well off and have needs, but there is enough humanity in the community to help others with their needs. And I start to think about Goodwill, and I start to think about Salvation Army, and I start to think about, my dad going to food pantries at Thanksgiving and help serving food. And it just reminds me that, we need to remain human and to think of others you and I, Phil, are very fortunate to be able to sit here today and have this conversation using technology and all sorts of different things. But it helps humble me to see those sorts of things and to recognize that we can help others and we should help others. And at times when we're seeing some of the people who are less fortunate being treated without respect and losing their places to live and not being able to afford food and having things like SNAP or whatever they're called, food stamps they used to be called, taken away, we start to lose our humanity. And I think it's extremely important all the time, but maybe more so now because we celebrate it, to think about others and the humanity that we should be sharing. And I encourage those of you who can to help in any way you can at this time of year, because it's only going to get colder, it's only going to get winterier, and there will be people of greater need. And just think about how you can help, whether it's with money, whether it's with time, whether it's with contributions in your own fashion, and to help and think of others and not just yourself all the time.
Couldn't agree more. again, what he said. I just want to once again implore all of you to not just think of Thanksgiving as a one-day event, but think of Thanksgiving as an aspirational goal how you for you and how you approach everything, including your own challenges. I think if we use that as a basis for dealing with our disagreements, we'll come out a whole lot better. Peter, I think we're running out of time, don't you?
I do, because the only thing I was going to ask, and we joked about this before we got started, is which turkeys would you pardon at this time of year?
Yeah, let's not go down that road.
And I
Not
don't think
today.
either.
Why don't we extend that to our next podcast
Yes, we will. So
as we
anyhow,
follow our own advice and adopt the mantra of um, of being in a mode of giving thanks, regardless of our um, uh, regardless of our present feelings.
hey, Phil, have a great Thanksgiving. Enjoy your family. I know you're going to be out there cooking the turkey. You and Doris will be having and hosting some people. And have a great Thanksgiving, and enjoy the family. And let's continue to help others with these courageous conversations.
Same to you, my friend, and to all of our listeners. I think we're up to 26 of you now. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for making comments about our podcast when we happen to get out of our own four walls and run into you. And let us know what you think, even if you do it online. We appreciate you.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.